Hi, British media. I hate to sound conspiratorial, but why do you want to bring down the British government right now? I mean, I come with receipts. Let's take Chinagate, for example, where you keep saying that the Labour government have collapsed the case against China. Like, it's now a matter of public record that the only politician to have seen those papers that have collapsed the China trial was Rishi Sunak. But you've hardly said anything about that. In fact, you're amplifying Rishi Sunak at the moment. Here he is talking in the Sunday Times about if we want growth, don't push up taxes. That'll be the Rishi Sunak that pushed up taxes. Your hypothesis is Labour aren't doing anything because they desperately want the Chinese to build their embassy in London. But you fail to really acknowledge that it was Boris Johnson that set up that deal. So is Boris Johnson the threat to our security? I mean, I don't know. But it was Boris that met with Lebedev with no aides present and never told anybody what was said in that meeting, and then went on to put him into the House of Lords. And I mean, it was on Boris Johnson's watch that the Russian report came out. That'll be the Russian report that says there should be further investigation into Russian interference into Brexit. That'll be the recommendation that nobody has implemented yet. Which kind of begs the question, why are you focusing on China when right now we've just seen a court case conclude which has discovered that one of Nigel Farage's busy mates was actually a Russian asset? And bizarrely, whilst everybody seems to acknowledge that this is concerning, and indeed a threat to our national security, why aren't you demanding an inquiry on it? Why aren't you screaming for this government to instigate an investigation into Russia's role, if any, into Brexit? Especially as just yesterday, Nigel Farage stood up in the House of Commons and asked for us to leave the ECHR. The ECHR is our last safety net to protect the British people from the government. In fact, 3 politicians have taken the British government to the ECHR to demand that they investigate Russia due to national security risks. Yet it's literally a handful of journalists talking about this. Carol Cadwallader has been extraordinary in her work around this topic, as has Peter Dukes. Now again, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but it is known that the X algorithm, for example, over-amplifies the far right. They help spread the word of people like Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage to a wider population. And there are countless people in the UK now that only get their information from X. That said, it's also true to say that the mainstream media now increasingly get their headlines from X as well. And I kind of get it. Why didn't Starmer say yesterday, yes, there should be an investigation? It's been suggested that maybe he's waiting for the European courts to say that we have to investigate as a nation, because then that stops it being a political thing. Mind you, saying that, Nigel Farage will say, there you go, that's the ECHR interfering in British sovereignty again, as he's busy undermining it. The mainstream media, along with X, keep telling us that it's the people that come across in the small boats are the problem, even though they're a teeny tiny percentage of the asylum seekers in the UK. But it's a proven fact that Russia are helping the people smugglers. Because apparently Russia wants to flood Europe with these migrants in order to sow the seeds of division. As asylum seekers are reframed into an army trying to invade the UK, come in here to disrupt our culture. And instead of people researching, they believe it and get really scared. So flee to the political party that are going to save them from these invaders. But they're not invaders, they're just asylum seekers. Which then brings me back to this case. Which begs the question that if one politician was being paid to say Putin talking points over in the EU Parliament, why aren't we questioning all the other politicians that were over there equally spreading those lies? Especially when those politicians are known to have some dubious connections to people that seem to be very close to the Russians. Like, it's not conspiratorial to ask the question why there's not more investigation around the fact that the aide that used to upload Nigel Farage's YouTube clips was also a regular visitor to the Russian embassy. That would be the Russian embassy where we know that they used to upload YouTube clips to try to spread their propaganda. Which then begs the question, has Nigel Farage been compromised by Putin? And if not, why did he lie about meeting the Russian ambassador when he clearly did, as demonstrated above? But why are you lot not asking him these questions every single day? Which then leads me to question, why are organisations like the BBC over-amplifying the voice of reform. Like, I know you're going to tell me it's because they're doing well in the polls, but my question is, would they be doing well in the polls if you guys weren't over-amplifying their lies every single day? And why does the BBC always sort of disguise when it's a reform person on? This week, Matthew Goodwin, described as an author, an academic, and a presenter on GB News. But he is clearly a mouthpiece for reform on a channel that does nothing but promote reform. And indeed, when we're on that topic, why are we all okay with 2 TV channels that literally do nothing other than promote the Putin propaganda lines? For example, here's Deputy Dick's girlfriend, currently living in Dubai as an economic migrant, talking to Talk TV because she's apparently their overseas correspondent these days, saying that immigration is self-harm for the UK, which surely should be pointed out sounds a little bit familiar. And so many questions about Isabel as well, because at one point she actually named that she thought Aaron Banks was being used by the Russians. And I mean, her and Deputy Dick have just come back from a holiday with a Russian oligarch. Yet going back to Question Time every other week, even though they've only got a handful of MPs, there is a representative from Reform. Nadine Dorey's here being described as a Daily Mail columnist, but as we know, recently defected to Reform. Zia Youssef, the man that bought his way to the top of a political party, seemingly is a regular guest on Question Time, but he's never put under scrutiny for the fact that he lied and said that Nathan Gill and Nigel Farage didn't even know each other. Deputy Dick, another regular. Or even more bizarre, it was just yesterday that Zia Youssef was saying, why on earth do you keep putting our councillors under scrutiny? But look, Thomas Kerr, a Reform councillor, was on Question Time. No other local councillors go on that programme. Zia back again. Tim Montgomery this time. But again, in this description, they're not really explicit about how much of a reformer Tim is. Or how about Anaya Iman, described as a journalist? I mean, even that's a bit loose, isn't it? 'Cause it's the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. But you guessed it, she's part of Reform. Deputy Dick back again. Literally every other week, BBC Question Time platforms a party that potentially is a national security risk. Meanwhile, no press seems to really talk about the Greens, who have a similar number of MPs and a rise in membership. And barely anybody at all talks about the Lib Dems, who, let's not forget, have got 72 MPs and run considerably more councils than Reform. So it's hard to see how this is conspiratorial when the evidence is quite stark, isn't it? Why are our mainstream media going along with a twisted algorithm to promote and over-amplify a party who potentially are a national security risk to the UK, whilst meantime doing everything they can to undermine a government who actually, they might not be the best government in the world, but they are most certainly not the worst. Over to you, British media, as you were.